Ambassador Christian College presents the Keith Slough Commentary with Dr. Keith Slough.
Again, this is Keith Slough from Ambassador Christian College. I've been doing a series on the second coming of Jesus, the rapture, when it comes, and will that day overtake us as a thief in the night. I read to you 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 4, where it says, that day shall not overtake you as a thief in the night. Now, if you're a regular listener to this radio program, you know that Jesus said that to the world. It will be a shock. It'll be a surprise. They're not going to be aware of it. They're going to be completely oblivious, and all of a sudden Jesus returns, and they're going to say, who is that? They're not going to know. You and I'll know. If we're alive when that comes, when that occurs, and we're all of a sudden the trumpet sounds, we look up, we're going to know it's Jesus. Now, when will that occur? Let's say you and I are alive when Christ returns. We're going to know. Let me turn to Luke 21, the Olivet prophecy, the prophecy that Jesus gave to his apostles just prior to his crucifixion. They asked him about the stones in the temple. They were talking about how beautiful those stones were. If you've been to Washington, D.C., and you looked at some of the big buildings they have up there, it's just amazing. It is really something to see. So in Luke 21, verse 5, and as some spoke of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts, he, Jesus, said, as for these things which you behold, the days will come in the which there shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. In other words, there would be a disaster. And just 39 years later, in A.D. 70, the Roman armies, Titus and his Roman armies, came in there and leveled Jerusalem, killing over 1 million Jewish people and destroying the temple. Verse 7, they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be? Now, that's the question that every Christian would like to know. Okay, when? And what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? And Jesus talks about there will be wars and rumors of wars, but don't be upset now because that's going to happen. And then he said they're going to persecute you. Verses 12 through 17, they're going to persecute you. And then he said in verse 20, and when you shall see Jerusalem compassed, that means encompassed, surrounded with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Now, somebody's going to say, but wait a minute, that happened in A.D. 70. Yes, it did. And Jerusalem has been destroyed multiple times, but Jesus did not return. This is a destruction that occurs just prior to his second coming. Then, at that time, when Jerusalem is surrounded by armies, and the desolation is near, then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. If you're on a Holy Land tour that day, then depart out of that area. Get out of there as soon as you can. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. If you're in other countries, such as the United States of America, or Britain, or Europe somewhere, Canada, don't go on a Holy Land tour. That's not the time to go. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. And it starts in Jerusalem. Now, if you read Matthew 24, that's Matthew's account of the Olivet prophecy. He says in verse 21, for then shall be great tribulation. And that's the tribulation, the days of vengeance. Now, Jesus tells us in Matthew 24, verse 29, and immediately after the tribulation of those days. And you can find out what happens. Verse 29 of Matthew 24, after the tribulation, and now read verses 29, 30, and 31. It says that the sun goes dark, the moon won't give her light, the stars fall from heaven, that what theologians nickname the heavenly signs. Now I'm reading Luke's account here. Luke 21:25. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon. Joel chapter 2 says the moon will be turned to blood. The sixth seal of Revelation in chapter 6 says the moon will be turned to blood. Not Not that it's going to become liquid, but it's going to be the color of blood red. And in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. Now that would be caused by earthquakes. When you go to the book of Revelation, you'll find that earthquakes are predicted at the very time of the end. And of course, if there's an earthquake out in the ocean somewhere, that could cause a giant tsunami, some giant wave that could cause a lot of problems for ships, and especially for those living on the coast. It could cause serious problems with flooding and loss of life. And Jesus said, the seas and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, because they don't understand all this, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Perhaps meteorites falling, because ever so often meteors or asteroids come very close to the earth and pass the earth. Some of the smaller meteors enter our atmosphere, and you see it as a shooting star. Well, that's going to happen too. There's going to be a giant meteor shower where the stars looks like they're all falling from heaven because of this giant meteor shower that's going to scare the daylights out of a lot of people, thinking the end of the world is near when they see things like that. So it says the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And not the third heaven where God lives. Everything's great up there. Everything's smooth and peaceful in the third heaven where God lives. This is the heaven where we live, the sky. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud up in heaven, the first heaven, the atmosphere, with power and great glory. Now Jesus said, when these things begin to come to pass, you have the tribulation, you have the heavenly signs, and then, of course, he didn't tell you here, but then the seventh seal of Revelation is the day of the Lord. And there are 7 trumpets, and you're going to have, but when it starts to happen is when it says, verse 28, when these things begin to come to pass, then look up, and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws nigh. Now, you may say, I'm already redeemed, I'm a Christian, but he's talking about something else. In Romans 8 and verse 23, and not only they, but ourselves also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, that's born-again Christians, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, waiting. What are we waiting for? Waiting for the adoption, to wit, that is to say, the redemption of our body. That's at the rapture. See, your spirit has been redeemed. You are a redeemed Christian, but your body has not been redeemed. When does that occur? That's what we're waiting for, the redemption of our body. And we'll get a glorified body when Jesus returns. Now, when does that happen? When you see these things begin to come to pass, lift up your heads. Lift up your eyes and lift up your heads, because that's where Jesus is coming from, the clouds of heaven. And know that your redemption is near. It hasn't happened yet. Interesting. Because people say, well, we won't be here when all this happens. Yeah, we will. Because he didn't say you're going to be up in heaven looking down at all these things. He says look up and lift up your heads, because you're going to be down here on the earth. Now, if you happen to be an astronaut and you're on the International Space Station, yeah, you would be looking down. But 99.9% of all Christians are still going to be earthbound, standing on this physical earth and looking up at the clouds. Yeah, if you're on the moon, you'd be looking toward the earth, and if you're up in the space station, you'd be looking down. But if you're on the earth, you're going to be looking up, and that's where Jesus is coming in the clouds of heaven. He says, now when these things happen, then know your redemption draws near. Hasn't happened yet. And yet people will tell you that Jesus could come back at any second. No. What did we read on the last program? Paul said that don't be deceived by people who are telling you that the day of the Lord is now present. It's not. He said, I beseech you by Jesus coming and our gathering together unto him. Everybody agrees that's the rapture. That day, the day of the rapture, that day shall not come. And then he mentions 2 things. Except there come first the falling away and the man of sin be revealed. Those 2 things have to happen before we can be raptured. Boy, that's simple. But you see, if you just always parrot what you've always heard, you're not going to understand that. You take somebody that's heard the same thing over and over and over and over, it is hard to get that out of his heart and get the truth in. You take a kid who thinks that 2 plus 2 is 5, and he's heard that ever since he was 3 or 4 years of age. Maybe the kids in the neighborhood playing a trick on him. He goes to first grade, and the teacher says, what's 2 plus 2? He just parrots what he's always heard. He says 5. The teacher says, no, it's wrong, it's 4. And he's not going to believe it because he's always heard something else. He's always heard it. And once you get trained a certain way, they say it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And some of us are the same way. And I'm teaching you what Jesus said, and yet it's hard for many of you because that's not what you believe. Now, we have an article. It was the May-June 2016 issue of the Bible Truth. And we still have some copies around if you would like to get that. And it's about the 40th Jubilee. Now you say, what's that? The Jews have a legend that the Messiah, whoever he is, because they don't know it's Jesus, they don't believe it is Jesus, but they're going to be surprised one day. They say that the Messiah will come and set up his kingdom in a Jubilee year. Jesus Christ is returning to set up his kingdom. The next Jubilee will very likely coincide with the 2000th anniversary of the crucifixion of Calvary. What year is that? Now, most of you know that the crucifixion occurred somewhere between, well, they used to say between 29 and 33. Well, now we know 33 is completely too late. We also know that 29 is too late. So now the majority of theologians say, well, the crucifixion occurs somewhere between 30 and 32. Most Protestants just round it off and say 30. There are a number that say it's 32. And there are some that say that's 31. And you get this article. It's free of charge. We're not asking for money. There's no request for money at all. And we're not going to give your name to somebody else or sell your name. We don't do that. We'll send you this article free of charge on the 40th Jubilee and what year that may be. Now, if the Messiah does come in a Jubilee year, and it's very possible that he will, when's the most likely time for that to occur if he comes in Jubilee year? By the way, how many Jubilee cycles have there been since Jesus was crucified? 39. And we're approaching the 40th. There have been 39 Jubilees. So the next one will be number 40. For those of you who are prophecy students, or just biblical students in general, you know the number 40 is highly significant. It's the termination of trials and testing. Are we going through trials right now in this world? Is the world going through trials with the militant Arabs, the Muslims? The Muslims are the militant Arabs, and they're causing havoc around the world. Japan has said, we're not letting any of them in. And America can't wait to bring them over here. Our federal government is greatly desirous of having Muslims come to this country when we are at war with this religion. Not any particular nation, not Iraq or Iran or Saudi Arabia. We are at war with a religion. Now, I know Barack Obama said, we're not at war with Islam. Well, we ought not have anybody in the White House that doesn't know what's going on. So, yeah, we are at war, and we're bringing these people over here left and right by the tens of thousands, which is absolute insanity because obviously terrorists are going to be coming in and attempting to destroy this nation. The next Jubilee will be number 40. Will Jesus return around the 2000th anniversary of when he died for our sins on the cross? And will that be the 40th Jubilee? Now, here's an article that you need to read and show it to your pastor. Now, here's the telephone number to call. It won't even cost you a stamp. It's totally free, and we pay the shipping and everything. I mean, there's no shipping. It's just postage, but we'll pay everything to get this to you so you can read it. The area code is 704. The number is 938-6415. It's absolutely free of charge. 704-938-6415. Also, we're accepting applications into Ambassador Christian College, and we're offering a scholarship And you need to find out about this right away. You can get a degree.